The following story is from a collection called Tales from the Old V-Dub. If you enjoy it, please like the video and maybe subscribe to the channel. If you really enjoy it, click on the link in the description below and you will be able to buy the book. This story is called The Stonemason's Secret. It was getting late on a warm summer's evening, and the full-leaved trees that arched over the lonely lane made a dark green tunnel down which walked a young boy and his dog, one of them whistling and the other one sniffing at everything as they went. The boy's name was Pip, and he strode along with the help of a long stick with a hook at the end, like the kind that shepherds use. Over his shoulder was slung a loosely packed roll that looked like a homemade tent. "Come on, Sam, keep up," he called back, and paused a while as his faithful dog investigated a gatepost at the side of the lane. "No, Sam, this way," he cried, but Sam had slipped through the gate into a small grassy field beyond. Pip turned back and looked curiously over the gate into the front garden of an old stone house set back amongst the trees, with long soft grass all around. They were far enough from the village so that the houses were all set far apart, and this one had a strange, closed-up look about it, with windows all shuttered and dark. A little way off there was a long, low shed, equally dark and silent. Pip would have thought it abandoned except for a thin wisp of smoke winding up from the chimney. As he looked more closely around the field, searching for Sam, Pip was astonished to see, dotted here and there, lots of life-sized stone statues of children and animals. One statue under a tree was of a boy picking an apple. Another was a girl petting a little stone cat. There was one with a fishing rod, another with a ball, one even of a paper boy with a bag of newspapers on his shoulder, all carved out of stone. Pip finally spotted Sam sniffing at the little stone cat. "Will you come here?" hissed Pip. But Sam was just as curious as Pip, and he set off towards the shed at the back of the field with his tail wagging. Pip knew he would have to fetch him, so with a sigh he clambered over the gate and hurried across the field. As Pip followed Sam reluctantly towards the shed, all the time begging him to come back, they were suddenly stopped in their tracks by a loud creak of rusty hinges. The shed door swung slowly open and a strange figure emerged, all covered in white stone dust. It was as if one of the statues had come alive. Once out in the fresh air, the man coughed loudly and a cloud of dust was shaken from his face and shoulders. As he wiped his mouth on his sleeve, he became aware of the boy and his dog staring at him. "How long have you two been standing there? You look like you've seen a ghost," said the man with a snort that might have been laughter, but Pip wasn't sure. "Sorry, sir, I was just fetching my dog Sam, you see. We were on the road after tending the sheep in the summer pastures," said Pip, gesturing to the shepherd's crook in his right hand. "But then Sam here snuck in through the gate, and I... Pip trailed off as the man continued to fix him with a strange look, even as his hands were busy filling a pipe with tobacco. "Getting late in the day for travellers," he said finally, puffing the pipe into life with a lit match and examining Pip through the fragrant smoke. "Is that a tent?" He nodded at the bundle on Pip's shoulder. "Yes, it is," said Pip, and all at once he felt so tired from the long day's walk that he forgot his manners and blurted out, "Could we possibly camp for the night here in your garden, do you think?" The man smiled and nodded slowly at Pip. "Yes, you and Sam would be welcome to stay. It's a good spot for camping, all right. But there's one condition." And pointing the stem of his pipe at Pip, he went on. "After dark, you must promise not to leave your tent on any account. Well, that's when my wife likes to take her walk, you see." He paused and glanced briefly at the shuttered upstairs windows of the main house. "She's a very nervous type. She doesn't like to see people. Needs to be left alone, in peace. Are we clear?" Oh, of course. We'll be no trouble. You'll see. Thanks so much," said Pip. And as the man turned and went back into the shed, he straight away set to work putting up their makeshift tent, with Sam trying to help by getting tangled up in everything, as usual. Once that was done, Pip thought he would look around a little. Eyeing the house suspiciously, he thought it best to explore in the other direction. At this end of the garden, they reached a thicket of tall reeds, and between these a steep bank led down to a little stream, flowing merrily beneath some large trees. As Pip clambered down the bank, he was aware of a rhythmic creaking of branches, and once alongside the stream he found a little girl, quietly singing to herself as she went back and forth on a long rope swing tied to an overhanging tree. "Hello," said Pip. "Can I have a turn on your swing after you?" But the face that turned towards Pip had a sharp, stuck-up nose and was full of meanness. "No," said the girl. "I've only just started, and in any case we can't play together, so there. I'm not allowed. I shouldn't even be anywhere near here, if you must know." "Why's that?" said Pip, puzzled. "Because it's the witch's house, stupid. She hates children, especially stupid ones like you. She can turn you to stone, just with a look." And saying this, she unleashed a crazy-eyed stare at Pip from the swing. But then her face suddenly softened as she saw Sam looking up at her quizzically, his head cocked first on one side, then on the other. "OK then, have your stupid swing," she said, jumping down from the rope to give Sam a friendly pat on the head. That just can't be true, though," said Pip. "I think it's her husband who makes the stone statues." "Oh, give me strength," said the girl. "Well, don't say you haven't been warned, or you'll end up just like the others. The old witch won't get me, though. I know all the shortcuts, and I keep out of sight." Having said this, she gave Sam one last hug, and then, grumbling as she went about stupid grown-ups and their stupid rules, she turned and crept up the bank that Pip had come down, and then ducked into the undergrowth again and was gone. Much later that night, Pip and Sam were cosy and warm and sleeping soundly together in the little tent, when they were suddenly awoken by a noise outside. Was it a badger, or maybe a fox? They held their breaths and kept very still to listen. There were strange sounds, like the swishing of a long dress against the dew-wet grass, and then the saddest muffled sobs they had ever heard. Sam started to whine in sympathy, his eyes shining in the darkness. Pip put his outstretched finger against Sam's soft muzzle to quieten him. "Shh," he whispered. But then the footsteps outside stopped, turned around, and then hurried stumbling away. All at once, with a sudden scrabble, Sam leapt free of Pip's arms, wriggled quickly under the bottom of the tent, and shot outside to give chase, barking loudly as he went. "No, Sam! Stay here!" was all Pip had time to shout. But then suddenly, silence. Pip strained to listen over the pounding of his heart, but not a sound was heard from outside until, with a loud start, he heard a door slam shut some way off. "Sam!" hissed Pip, and then louder, "Sam!" But the only sound in answer was the hooting of an owl from the nearby trees. With nervous trepidation, Pip poked his head through the little door of the tent, and by the light of the full moon he saw a sight which brought hot, stinging tears to his eyes. There, just a few steps away, was a little stone statue of Sam. Pip covered the ground in an instant, pressed his head against the statue and listened. No breath, no heartbeat, just lifeless stone. Sam's mouth was open wide, his last bark frozen inside. "So it's true!" Pip's blood turned icy in his veins, but he didn't feel cold. He choked back his tears and put on his shoes, lit his little lantern and grabbed his shepherd's crook. Giving one last sorrowful pat to Sam's stony head and treading carefully so as to keep silent, he made his way slowly towards the big dark house, brooding against the moonlight. The windows were all shuttered up and dark as before, except for one tiny chink of light from an upstairs room. Pip had the eerie feeling that he was being watched, and he thought, it must be all these statues, so creepy in the moonlight. But as he examined them closer, he saw they weren't looking at him, but up at that same window, each one with a startled expression as if caught in the act of doing something, stealing an apple maybe, or unhooking a kite from a hedge. As Pip followed the lifeless gazes towards the window, there was a sudden banging of shutters and the little chink of light disappeared. Pip jumped at the sudden noise and instinctively covered his eyes with his hands, but then all was still again. As the moon shone down on the smooth stone faces all around, a sobbing, louder this time, reached Pip's ears. It was coming from behind the shutters of that upstairs window, there was no doubt of that. Sobs to make your heart break. Pip swallowed hard and shook his shoulders to give himself courage. He raised his crook as high as he could, and by standing on tiptoe, he was just able to reach. He gave 3 little taps against the window shutters. The crying stopped abruptly, and then silence. The owl hooted from the dark trees at the end of the garden, as if encouraging Pip to try again. Tap, tap, tap went the crook. Then, quite quietly, a tearful voice was heard to answer. "Go away! Please go away for your own good," said the voice. "I know you didn't mean to do it," said Pip, "but I need my dog. Can you turn him back?" At that instant, and from nowhere, out of the dark, a huge, powerful hand suddenly gripped Pip's shoulder, and his crook was whisked away from him. A second later, he was held fast and staring wide-eyed into the white, dusty face of the stonemason. "You'll come with me now," he said gruffly, and with that he pushed Pip on ahead of him, not towards the house, but back across the garden towards the shed. "Better for you to have stayed in your tent, my boy," growled the stonemason, and as they passed by, he gave Sam's statue a tap with the crook. "And better for him, too." As they arrived at the shed, Pip was pushed through the door, which then creaked shut behind them. Inside the shed, it was warm and dusty. An old radio, somewhere under all the clutter of mallets and chisels, was playing music so softly that Pip could only just make it out. Drawings and tools hung everywhere on the walls, and through the gloom a dull blue flame danced at the bottom of a dented copper teapot. The stonemason hung Pip's lamp on a hook behind the door and pointed to a little stool for the boy. He then sat himself down with his back against the door, and both of them, as if by agreement, fell to looking at a stone figure on a low bench between them. Stone chips lay on the floor all around it, and a mallet and chisel lay just apart from the stonemason's dusty hands as he sat. He must have been working at the sculpture when he heard Sam barking, thought Pip. He glanced nervously at those big hands and then back once more to the statue. There was something about it that made Pip uneasy. That cross face and that pointy nose. He suddenly gasped with horror. It was the little girl from the swing. Pip stood up in a panic and felt his legs trembling, but the stonemason held up his chalky hand to speak. "It seems you've discovered our secret," he said darkly. "She can't help it, you know," he went on. "Grace is the last person in the world who would harm a child. But a curse was put on her years ago. A horrible, evil spell. If any child or animal meets her eyes directly, they are turned to stone instantly. That's why she stays locked away except at night. And that's why she's so miserable. I look after her because I still love her, despite everything. I changed the statues a little, changed their faces," he went on, glancing guiltily at the little stone girl, "so that no one will recognize them and come asking questions. They'd take my wife for a witch. But no, it was a witch that cursed her." And saying this, he banged his fist down on the bench, scattering the chips of stone. Pip struggled to understand. How could it be true? But as he pondered the mean little girl's statue, he saw that the stonemason had changed her hairstyle and made her chin more pointy. A little more work with the chisel, and even her own parents wouldn't recognize her. Meanwhile, the stonemason had taken up his tools again, and as the soft rhythmic tapping continued, Pip leant back against some old sacks and was soon asleep. A little while later, the stonemason bundled him up with an extra blanket and laid him back in his own tent to sleep. Then he quietly shut the shed door behind himself once more, and the regular soft tapping of the chisel resumed. A moment later, Pip's eyes sprang open. He was more than used to spending his nights awake with his sheep, and he had only pretended to fall asleep. He only knew he had to get Sam back. Curses can be lifted, he thought, and the only person to help was the stonemason's wife. He shook off the blanket and crept out of the tent. Then, without a sound, he hurried across the garden towards the big house once more. Once outside, he took 3 deep breaths, and with a trembling hand, he gave the door a gentle push. It didn't squeak, thank goodness, and letting go his breath, he crept inside and inched along the darkening hallway. Suddenly, his foot struck a heavy rock, it seemed, and only Pip's outstretched hand saved him from crashing to the floor. He felt in the darkness for what had tripped him up and found it was the statue of a little curled-up cat, with even a little stone collar on it. Pip strained his senses for any sign of movement nearby. A cough, even breathing, remembering all the time that when he found the stonemason's wife, he must not look her in the eye. He groped his way silently up the stairs, and now a faint glow revealed a little landing with 3 doors. Under one of these doors was a slit of light, and yes, the faint sound once again of a woman crying softly to herself. Grasping the round door handle, he shut his eyes tight. It was now or never, thought Pip. And with a sudden leap, he sprang through the door. Immediately there was chaos in the room. The woman let out a frightened scream at the boy's sudden appearance and wheeled quickly away from the door. Pip screamed in his turn, his arms outstretched before him and his eyes shut tight. "Please help me, please, oh please," he cried. "You're in terrible danger," replied the woman, with her hands held tightly over her eyes so as not to look at him. But please, it's Grace, isn't it? You must help. It's Sam, my dog," continued Pip, now stumbling towards her voice and crashing painfully into a table. "You're mad! Get out of here while you still can," she screamed, backing away from him behind a sofa. But Pip kept coming forward and crashing into everything, hurting his knees and shins so that tears streamed from his squeezed shut eyes. The woman had begun to cry in her turn and finally took pity on him. "Here, come here," she said. "But keep your eyes shut tight. Oh, please keep them shut." Stepping behind Pip, she wrapped her arms around him tightly and they sank down onto a little sofa. "Sit here," she said. There, be calm now. What's your name? You seem to know mine." "It's Pip," he said. "I knew you weren't really a witch, but the children, why?" Grace didn't answer, but dried her own tears with her sleeve and tried to steady her quivering lips. Then, finally, "It was Edward's mother," she blurted out. "She was a wicked sorceress who didn't want to lose her precious son to another woman. But Edward and I were in love and wanted children of our own. When he finally plucked up the courage to leave home and marry me, she came to the wedding and, pointing straight at me in front of all the guests, she uttered this wicked spell. 'You came and took what's mine from me, but happy you will never be. You stole my only son from home to tend your children made of stone.'" Grace covered her anguished face with her hands as she remembered that awful day. "That's why we've never dared to have children of our own," she wailed. Pip's heart was breaking as he listened to Grace's story, and he turned quickly and buried his face against her shoulder. His tears came heavy and hot as he sobbed for all the sadness he felt. For Sam, who he missed so terribly, for Edward in his sorry work, and for Grace, who desperately wanted to love children but could only harm them. Grace held Pip tight in her arms and rocked him gently to soothe him. With her soft hand, she wiped away first Pip's tears and then her own. They stayed like that until, exhausted, both of them finally fell asleep. Some hours later, the bright sun of a new day found a chink between the window's dark and heavy shutters, and a warm ray of light shone straight onto the pair, gently waking them up. Yawning and not remembering to keep his eyes closed, Pip looked up for the first time at Grace's troubled face. The next second, his heart missed a beat as he realised that both their eyes had met, and yet he hadn't been turned to stone. Grace let out a gasp of astonishment too. She looked down at Pip's tear-stained face, searching there for an explanation. Perhaps, she thought, perhaps his pure tears, full of pity, had somehow entered her own eyes and broken the evil curse. All the years of pain suddenly vanished from her face, and Pip marvelled at how beautiful she was. At that moment, however, a great low rumble of thunder shook the house, making a teacup on the table rattle loudly in its saucer. The thunder grew, and the room was once more plunged into darkness. Grace and Pip leapt towards the window and threw open the shutters to see what on earth was happening. The morning sun had been blotted out by a dense black cloud that seemed to cling to the treetops. As they looked out over the garden and towards Edward's shed a little way off, their hearts fell once more at the sight of all the statues, all those children frozen forever, and most heartbreaking for Pip, the little stone dog barking at nothing. The air smelt electric, and the first heavy splats of rain began to fall. Within moments, the shower had turned into a deluge, and the grey stone of the statues became streaked and dappled with dark splodges of water. Then, as Grace and Pip watched, the most extraordinary thing began to happen. Starting at the top of each statue, where the stone was now totally soaked from the rain, new colours began to emerge. First a shock of blonde hair, then a bright blue jumper and a pair of black shorts. Little by little, it was as if this marvellous rain were washing away the stone dust to reveal the children trapped within. As soon as the statues were restored to their normal living appearance, one by one the children each began to move. Hesitantly at first, as if they had forgotten for the briefest moment what they had been doing. But soon the garden was filled with children, laughing and running in the rain, as if nothing had happened. Grace turned and gave Pip a great hug of joy, but his eyes remained fixed on the last lonely statue of the little dog. With one mind, they rushed downstairs and out into the final scattered raindrops of the departing storm, only to meet Edward rushing up the path towards them. His face was radiant with joy. "The statues!" he cried. "The children!" Most of the children were now hurrying off home, still laughing as they went to change out of their wet clothes and give their parents the happiest shock of their lives. Over by the fence, though, was the boy still munching his big rosy apple. And whistling down the lane beyond went the paper boy with his sack. Edward was about to whirl Grace off her feet and cover her with kisses, but at a sorrowful glance from her, he stopped, and they both turned to watch Pip, who was kneeling in the soaking grass sobbing, his arms flung around the little stone dog. "Oh, Sam, please wake up!" he cried. "Look, you can mostly see the colours of his fur. Why hasn't the magic worked on him?" he pleaded, turning to Grace and Edward. "Maybe his fur's too thick," said Edward. "The rain didn't get him wet enough, perhaps." Pip suddenly remembered the steep bank at the end of the garden. "I'll carry him to the stream." The next moment, he'd seized the stone dog and was trying to lift him with all his might. Edward had his doubts, but he didn't need to be asked, and in the next moment he'd lifted the little statue up in his dusty arms, and together they headed off eagerly to the stream. Once there, Edward placed it down gently in the rippling water, and Pip immediately began scooping water over the rough stone fur. "I'm sure it's working," said Pip. "You can see it's working," and he scooped the water ever faster. Edward and Grace watched silently, only exchanging a heartbroken glance now and then. His colour did seem more natural as Pip soaked the stone more and more desperately, but Sam's little statue remained just that. Suddenly, a cross voice from above interrupted them. "What a stupid waste of time washing a stone dog!" It was the little girl, back where she belonged, on her rope swing. "I preferred that little dog you had before," she said, hopping down to join them. Her mean expression softened, though, when she saw Pip's tear-stained face, and then, with a start, she recognised Edward and Grace, and the whole story fell into place. Her own face now suddenly lost all trace of meanness, and with a great cry of compassion, she knelt down in the water and threw her arms around the little statue. "Oh, what have they done to you, my lovely dog? Oh, my heart will break. It's just too sad." And saying this, she began to cry and cry. Pip kept on scooping water in a daze, whilst the others watched full of pity as the little girl's grief was so heartfelt. She pressed her face against the stone fur and wiped her own tears over the little stone eyes to make them shine. Then she straightened up and became stern once more. "Well, now you're just being stupid," she scolded, wagging her finger at the little statue. "You come back to us this minute, you naughty dog." They all stopped still at that moment, realising that it was over. Nothing was heard except a petulant sniff from the little girl and the soft burbling of the stream. But then, all at once, there was a soft crack like the shell of an egg breaking, and in the next instant they were being drenched in water. They all burst out laughing as Sam, having suddenly come back to life, shook his coat to dry himself in a whirlwind of spray. Then he jumped up to lick the little girl's face with doggy kisses before barking excitedly at everybody and wagging his tail so hard that Pip thought it might come off. He dived forward to embrace his beloved dog, but Sam had seen a squirrel and tore away, leaving Pip to fall headlong into the stream with a huge splash. The little girl stifled her giggles and helped Pip to his feet. The two children watched, smiling, as Edward finally took Grace in his strong arms and whirled her round like a roundabout, before kissing her on each cheek and then on the lips. The kisses were taking some time, and the two children looked away a little embarrassed. Their eyes fell on the rope swing. "Is it time for my go yet?" asked Pip. "No, get your own swing," piped the little girl. She jumped up on the swing and poked her tongue out at him. Pip breathed a happy sigh. Everything was back just as it should be. They found out much later that Edward's wicked old mother had died that very night. They never knew whether it was this event or Pip's tears that had lifted the curse on Grace? Perhaps you can decide. All they knew was that their nightmare was over, and they could now get on with building a happy life. After that eventful visit, Pip and Sam stopped by there every summer once they had finished working with the sheep. Pip even became friends with Emily, the little girl on the swing, who grew out of being so mean, as children often do. Edward and Grace never forgot how much Pip's bravery and his loyalty to Sam had helped them when it seemed that no one else could. As time passed, some changes came along. The house was opened up and nicely decorated. A new nursery had to be prepared, and the next year made bigger. Edward gave away his stonemason's tools and gave the shed over to Grace to house her new pets, a friendly goat and some chickens. Sam and Pip had many more adventures, but never forgot this one, and each of them shuddered a little whenever they were passing through a town and saw a statue.